Good evening, welcome to the party. And welcome to the inaugural Sports and Social Change Speaker Series sponsored by Nike and the opening of the launch of the USC Annenberg Institute for Sports Media and Society. I'm up here, we have this odd rule actually it's a policy at Annenberg, that the first person into the building in the morning with a tie on has to introduce everybody and welcome everybody at all the events during the day. Personally, I find it a wildly sexist policy, but policy is policy. So I'm the person who has to introduce everyone and thank everyone for showing up. And I wanted to mention just a few people out here this evening very briefly because we've got an extensive show for you and a number of people who have a lot of things to say. So I want to do this very quickly because I am the least useful person on the podium right now. But I wanted to thank some of the people involved in this, and I don't think Larry Gross has made it in this evening. But I wanted to note Larry Gross and Geneva Overholzer. Geneva, are you around somewhere? Geneva's got to be here someplace. I saw her earlier. The director, Larry Gross, is the director of the Comm School, and Geneva is the director of the Journalism School. Larry was the first person at the Comm School who looked at the minor in sports media studies and said, this is not just something that we could do here at Annenberg, this is something we should do here at Annenberg, and help champion that and get it through. Geneva, the director of the Journalism School, has been helping develop and push the study further, and you will be hearing some very interesting things out of the Journalism School soon in terms of programs for sports journalism. And by the way, you already have heard things from them. The Journalism School has an extensive program in sports journalism already. So Geneva's been developing a much more fulsome program even now. Also wanted to note Jeff Fellenzer. Jeff, where are you? This is such a big crowd, I'm blinded. Jeff? Oh, Jeff. Jeff took off and left the building. There you go. Thank you. Jeff, your seat's right up here. Anyway, Jeff has been championing this study for a number of years at Annenberg. I think the better part of 10 years he's been teaching here and telling everyone who would listen that this is an important study and should be pursued. Also, Dr. Bill Morgan, who is around here very close, has been helping. Dr. Bill Morgan has been helping us work on curriculum and developing ideas for the future in this study. So I wanted to just note a few of the people in the Annenberg School who've been doing important things in this field and helping develop it. Finally, really quickly, I'd like to thank John Hackett, and John is the tall guy in the room. Yeah, and John certainly should get applause. Because the tenuous hold I have on life now is primarily due to John. And also, John put much of this together and has done a brilliant job on this. And I can't even start thanking the people who've worked on this because it would take all night and I would forget someone because I'm a very old man and very forgetful. But I want to thank all of the people who helped out, Gio, Josh, and the others who have helped develop this. And finally, I want to thank the students who've shown up. I'm happy to see that there are a few students in the room here. This program was built to develop opportunities for students at the USC Annenberg School for Communication and at USC. That is the reason for this institute's existence. That is the goal of this institute. And when you judge the Annenberg Institute of Sports Media and Society, judge it on the opportunities it provides for USC and USC Annenberg students. Now, to say a few words before we get to our panel and to talk to you for just a moment about what we are working at here at the USC Annenberg School for Communication and Journalism, we have the Dean of the school, Dr. Ernest Wilson.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. That's better. Okay, you're all out there. Just want to make sure. Good. I want to thank all of you on behalf of the entire Annenberg School for Communication and Journalism for joining us this evening. I'm delighted to report that we had more than 400 responses of people who wanted to attend this event. This is one of the largest events that we've had at the Annenberg School for Communication and Journalism, and I want to thank each and every one of you for coming out to this event. What we are hoping and what I'm completely optimistic of is that 5, 10 years from now, you'll be able to say, I remember when this institute was just starting, and we had our first event. So you are present at the creation, as it were. And what I would like to do is just mention a couple of quick things. I want to thank Dan Durbin, first of all, for his leadership and fortitude and hanging in there to make sure that this institute has become a reality. So I would like to thank Dan Durbin for his contribution. The issue of the relationship between sports and media and society is hugely, hugely important. I know this is something that our panel is going to talk about today, but you look at any newspaper, any television program, and eventually it gets around to this issue. And our ambition at the Annenberg School is to become the best in the world, a modest ambition, in the area of sports, media, and society. And we have put together an institute which has several components. I'm just going to rattle them off, and then I'm going to sit down and let our real experts speak. First of all, we have this speaker series, which has been very generously funded by Nike, and I want to thank the Nike representatives who are here for having the vision and foresight to fund this 3 or 4 with sufficient resources to make it last for 3 or 4 years. So we have our speaker series. Secondly, and at the core of this has got to be academics and ethics. We're lucky enough to have created at the Annenberg School and then approved by the entire University of Southern California a minor in sports, media, and society. This means that the courses we offer will be open to anyone, any undergraduate in the university to follow this path. Secondly, we're creating a new program at the graduate level in journalism, which is so hugely important in this area, on a specialized master's in sports, media, and society. Thirdly, we will be conducting research in this area and create new knowledge that our teachers can teach and the practitioners can pay attention to. Fourthly, we have an extensive program in community outreach, beginning with elementary schools and then on to junior high schools and high schools, so that we create a pipeline, if you will, of well-informed young athletes as they move from the younger part of their life moving forward. And then finally, I do want to mention one of the more exciting elements of the program is we are creating a summer institute for professional athletes. This will be a program that will allow people who are approaching the end of their professional career to make the transition from playing on the field, playing on the court, to moving into other activities. Because this is a challenge. The average length of time for a professional player in the National Football League is how long? 3.5 years. So what do you do after that? So we are hoping to provide answers to that by providing transitional skills from playing on the field or playing on the court into life beyond that in the media, serving as making commentary behind the camera, or going into corporate communications and other kinds of activities. So let me stop here. I want to thank each and every one of you for coming. I especially want to thank our very distinguished panel. These are among the best and the brightest in the industry, and I would just like to give them a round of applause before they even start talking. Thank you. And enjoy the evening.
Thank you, Ernie. This would be so much more exciting to have said 50 years ago, because I could have said, we received a telegram today. But today we received an email. And I just wanted to pass it along to you. Nike's representative had intended to be here, but had some difficulties with last-minute meetings in Beaverton, Oregon. Wanted me to pass along the following email. He said, Dan, alas, some last-minute meetings here at Oregon have precluded my participation in today's events. Hopefully next time I can make it work. In the meantime, best wishes for a successful day. We are proud to work with you. Kind regards, Kit Boras. So they wanted, Kit wanted to have you know that. Before we introduced our group of panelists here, and they are esteemed panelists in every sense of the word, some of the top minds and top people in the sports industry, and I'm going to give them the briefest of introductions. They can fill it out, but if you don't know who these people are, you probably haven't been reading your paper very much. And we'll just start right at the far end. At the far end, we have Dr. Lawrence Wenner, who is a professor of communication, particularly sports communication, at Loyola Marymount University. Next to Dr. Wenner, we have Scott Boras, who is a Major League Baseball's often called super agent, someone who gets teams to pay lots of money for lots of players, and certainly probably the most successful sports agent in the history of Major League Baseball. Next to Scott Boras, we have Pat O'Brien, who has a long history in sports broadcasting and other forms of broadcasting, including Access Hollywood and The Insider. Next to Pat O'Brien, we have Tara Lipinski, who is also a broadcaster and works for NBC Universal doing color commentary on ice figure skating, but you probably know her better as the gold medalist in the Nagano Olympics in 1998 for figure skating. And you know, yeah, poor Pat O'Brien, you know, he did Access Hollywood, for goodness sake, people. You didn't give him any applause, you know. Thank you. There we go. And next to Tara, we have Joe Heitzler, who has lately been the CEO of CART and has worked in a variety of other areas in the field of sports and sports communication. And finally, at the end, we have David Neal, who has, for a number of years, been the executive producer of NBC Sports, including he executive produced a number of Olympics coverages, including the Beijing Olympics, and now is the CEO of David Neal Productions. So we have, and I'm assuming that's for the whole panel, but I would like to hand it over to Pat O'Brien, who will start the discussion, and we'll be our panel will be discussing for about an hour now questions of ethics in sports media. Pat, thank you.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Hi, Pat. Let me make sure this thing is working okay. By the way, there's one person I want to introduce in the crowd. John, are you still here? John Neighbor? Where's John? There he is. Ladies and gentlemen, in the back of the room is John Neighbor. 4 Olympic gold medals in 1976 and a silver. He won all his medals in world record time. One of the greatest swimmers in the history of the Olympics is John Neighbor. He's snuck in the back of the room here. And my good friend, we've been around the world together. Hi. We're here tonight to talk about, every day I start my day by putting something really, really smart on my Facebook. And this morning it was enjoying reality. And that's kind of where we are trying to get to now in the world of sports and media and ethics and in our daily lives, is to try to enjoy the reality of what's going on around us. I was thinking of, there's an old story, maybe Scott, you've heard this one. Guy goes to a baseball game and he sits next to a priest. And they're watching the game, and the guy comes up to bat, he goes up to the plate, he does the sign of the cross, and third pitch, he hits a home run. So he runs around, does the sign of the cross again, and goes back in. In the rotation, he comes up once again, he does the sign of the cross, and second pitch, hits a triple. Runs around, comes back. Third time he's up to bat, he does the sign of the cross, and hits another home run, and finally the guy turns to the priest next to him, and he said, Padre, does this prayer thing really work? And the priest said, yeah, if you can hit. So what we want to try to teach people to do or get you to think about is how to hit and do what we call the reality of what's going on in the world. There are so many stories about sports right now. It used to be, and maybe in your time and in my father's time, so actually in my time, when are on the front page. I've been there. And a lot of them have been scandals, and a lot of them have been surly, and a lot of them have been untrue. And what we want to talk about tonight, I hope, is how you wade through the crap that's out there, that probably about 90% of it is wrong. You can Google any person you want. Pick the cleanest person that you think is alive, and Google this person, and you'll see so many awful things about them. A couple of mine are true, by the way, but not all of them. well, I'm serious. We'll get to this tonight. But the internet, when it takes over, and that's what we're going to have to deal with in the society now, is the internet taking over a story and putting something out, and all of a sudden it becomes gospel. I don't want to take all the time, but the Tiger Woods story is a great example. When there was supposed to be a sex tape, and this was the headline story in every tabloid, every internet blog, every newspaper, radio, talk radio, and there was never a sex tape. I mean, some goof that dressed up like him. But this became gospel, and there's never a correction. If there's a correction, I'm just going to say there's never a correction. And this is what athletes have to deal with today. There's a situation in Auburn with the quarterback, Cam Newton, there were allegations that one of his people took money or was asked for money to have him come play at another school. I spoke to your coach, Lane Kiffin, today at length about this. And we talked about the fact that this story is going to, I think, ruin this kid's career just because of the allegations. He could not have done anything, but it's out there now, and every time Cam Newton's name comes up, they're going to say, isn't he the kid who took money? You're very familiar with a story like that here on this campus with Reggie Bush. Not all that was true. But anyway, these things roll along. So let's begin. Scott, let's begin with you. Scott is, he said famous. He's more infamous than famous sometimes. But Scott is an agent who cares about his athletes, who gets the $200 million contracts and gets the $10 million contracts and treats them all like his brother. But Scott is, as much as anybody in here, has been in the middle of all this. And when we talk about ethics in media, let's begin with ethics in media. Are there any? I mean, I'm not sure there are any ethics anymore.
Well, again, the prospect of being an attorney and being a former professional athlete, you run the dynamic of protection of the First Amendment right. You want journalists there, and frankly, journalists create sport. The attitude of skill creates celebrity, and celebrity creates interest. And from that interest, we have created a model whereby the discipline, the commitment, the ascension to greatness on the field is really a second-page story. We have created a dynamic where the greater story is the allegation, the mystery, the suspicion. And the First Amendment allows us to say, because of skill, that person is now a celebrity, that he is a public figure. And the liberalness of the First Amendment allows that athlete to be placed in a broader spectrum of targeting by the media, which they know full well is a brush that allows them the liberalness of the alleged. And in dealing with that, particularly with the speed of the internet, particularly with also the youth of the people involved, and the fact that those athletes, particularly in the sport that I'm involved with, baseball, they report to a media center daily. They are at a place where the media can basically come and visit them almost 180 days out of the year. And it affects their teammates, their franchises, their performance. And the management of this is now become one of the greatest dances and arts that you have to, because your first job and my job is that you have to get the young man that the game itself is what will always attack you. It's the game that beats you. We know we're not winning the game because all of us grow old and the game will still be there and we won't. So you've got to get the athlete to focus on the game. The interruption of that is his success at the game. The further displacement of that focus, and really what the fans want, which is high performance at his skill in his game, is grandly interrupted by the media, who are really evolving to a hierarchy of brand ascension in their fields, mainly because they reach a story that no one else has, which is usually not that of the athlete's performance?
I should have gone with Tara first, but I've known Tara since she was 10. Now she looks like she's 12.
Yeah.
But I want to switch to David on this topic, and then we'll get to Tara because I'm sure you've had an experience with this. But David, Neal, you've all heard of Dick Ebersol, who does the NBC Olympics so great. Basically, David did all the work. Dick is the genius of the Olympics, but David Neal is a brilliant producer, executive producer of sporting events. I worked 2 Olympics with him. I've been all over the world with this guy. And he is a person who creates the celebrity by choosing what athletes to put in prime time or what events and that sort of thing. And David, you and I have sat around in many parts of the world and talked about, an athlete and what they're doing behind the scenes in this. How do you determine what goes on the air? Let's take the Olympics, for example, because you and I both were in the Olympic business before the internet was big and after. And so how did it change after the World Wide Web took control?
Pat, I think the biggest thing is in sports television, you have to begin with an acknowledgement that at least one foot is still on the journalism side of the fence. That when you start trying to distort the facts, when you start trying to create stories that aren't there, and there's great temptation to do that, then you get on some pretty treacherous ground. It's interesting to me that Michael Phelps, who I think my fellow Trojan John Neighbor would agree is if not the greatest Olympian of all time, certainly the greatest Olympic swimmer of all time, that for all of his prowess in the pool, he got much more publicity when the News of the World ran a photo of him maybe taking a hit out of a bong. That became the thing that was bigger. I think that you live in a different part of the business when you're actually the rights holder, when you're presenting the events. At NBC for the Olympics, we would have a pretty robust group of researchers who would tell us going into the games who the likely stars were. And then really, our focus was on documenting their performance on the field of play. Whether it was Michelle Kwan, whether it was Michael Phelps, whether it was Usain Bolt, whoever it was, we would document them. And frankly, we sort of left the sensationalism, we left that to others to purvey. We wouldn't go there because, frankly, we thought that our job was to document what they were doing as athletes.
Right. And Tara, who has been through this, but I think you kind of missed the craziness of the internet. You were just on the edge of it.
Right.
But what were your experiences? I mean, Tara used to come off the ice and I'd be standing there, but we never got into anything that she did wrong because I don't think she'd done anything wrong. That's the problem here. But what's your experience with the media, especially after, always going for whatever they thought was wrong in your life instead of what was right?
Well, first off, I think I took so much pride, and it was such an honor to represent my country and be an Olympian that every decision I made, I took caution with. I wanted to make the right decision, go down the right path. But for the media, it affected my life greatly. Just as an amateur, I was younger than my rival, Michelle Kwan, and if you get down to facts, pretty much no one got it right. But there was many times I remember after my nationals, I came in second from a fall, but it was pretty much stated that I was not going to win the gold medal. And for the next month, it really affected me. That I had to overcome that. I couldn't pick up a newspaper. I couldn't pick up a magazine. My parents forbid it. I got on an airplane, and in the little, pocket, I read something, and there was an article there. So it was pretty much everywhere. And, as I look back now, I realize that's okay. It's good to have rivals. In the end, it's your performance that counts. As an athlete, talent will prevail. They can say whatever they want, but it's your talent that you need to focus on.
But how did it affect you, though? I mean,
I was 15. I was always crying. It
Right.
really affected me. The things that was it was unbelievable. I just thought I didn't do anything wrong, and I grew up with it at such a young age that I started to just accept it and knew that was what it was. And even after, some of the journalists came over, and some would apologize, and some would say, that's our job, and I understand that. And now, as I'm commentating, I try to take my experiences and keep that in mind, and let the performance should tell a story. And sometimes you can lead a viewer one way or another, but in the end, let it unfold by the athletes.
It always seems like figure skaters have the most drama of the Olympians. I don't know why, but because there have been some sad cases. We had a good friend of ours die from a drug overdose last year, a couple years ago, and Katarina Witt brought enough drama to the ice than anybody, but they kind of let her go, I think, a little bit, don't you think?
Well, I think that's just with everything. You look at Nancy Kerrigan and Tanya Harding. It was tragic. It was awful. I know Nancy personally, and it was such an amazing story for her and courageous to get through that. But really, I don't know if she realizes how the sport took off from that incident.
I remember it was in, where was it? It was in Lillehammer. No, but that was Detroit, but her silver was in Lillehammer, and Oksana Bayil beat her. But I remember when she was skating that night, she was in the same, on the same night as who hit her? As Tanya Harding, sorry. And I remember I walked in the back door, and Tanya had just skated, done her rehearsal, and I walked in, I opened the door, and Tanya's standing there crying. She goes, "Oh, Pat, do you have a cigarette?" And and I said, "What's going on?" And she was out of her mind, but that's so. What is wrong with the doc? What is wrong with the way we teach journalists now? I mean, are we not telling them that there's a reality and that there's also something that's not so true, or they just go on their own?
I'm not sure we teach them wrong. I think we try. But what's interesting? A certain type of person is drawn to sport journalism. And I think most of the time, and most of the stories, frankly, are, we like to read the sports pages. We like to watch ESPN. Why? Because it doesn't have all those terrible things that are on the front page.
That's because most of the ESPN people are now doing terrible things on the front page, but that's another.
There's been some discussion of that lately. But if you think about it, most of the stories, most of the time we have in the sports press are stories that make us feel good about an athlete overcoming adversity, to become a hero, to sacrifice for the team. Let us not forget that those are the bulk of the story. When we have these things that beg the question of what went wrong, why did this person do that, we're interested. But we've created a gossip industry, a celebrity industry, not just in sports. In a way, because we're so interested, we're responsible. And those stories do sell, they get the attention, they have marketplace value. And I think that ultimately explains why we have TMZ, now we have TMZ Sports.
Yeah.
They wouldn't have invented this had there not been our eyeballs willing to click and look at those stories. So I'm not sure we're teaching the journalists wrong, but I think the marketplace teaches journalists that there are rewards for following these kinds of storylines.
Yeah, to be honest, I didn't even realize I was a celebrity until I blacked out and made a stupid phone call and was on the internet and the front page of the National Enquirer for about 6 weeks. And I kept saying, what the hell, what's the deal here? But that's all people want to see now. And Joe, I'll get to you in a minute, but David, on that note, not me, but don't you think that sports really became sports after Joe Namath? I mean, don't you think that Joe was kind of the guy that, for those of you who are not old enough, Joe was a long-haired quarterback who played for the New York Jets, number 12, a playboy, good-looking guy, out on the town every night, and suddenly he comes along and guarantees, which in that day and age, in the Super Bowl III, guaranteed his team would win. Basically, he was saying to the bettors who bet on our team. But Joe, I'll get to you in a minute. But David, don't you think that that's how football began when you had a superstar and drama involved at the same time?
Yeah, Pat, it sort of was a signature moment that said it's not enough now to just be terrific at what you do on the field, but you need to transcend that. You need to become a member of the pop culture, and Joe certainly did that. And in any sport that you look across now, it's interesting that a guy like Dennis Rodman, who was a key part of the great run that the Bulls had under Michael Jordan, he was not particularly great as a basketball player. He could rebound and he could pick up fouls. But he married Carmen Electra, and he had more body piercings than this entire room combined, I think. And that made him someone that people were fascinated with. And I remember one game I was producing, he dove for a loose ball and collided with the announce table where our friend Bob Costas and Doug Collins were, and basically took Bob down to the floor. And Bob said on the air, "I feel like I've just shaken hands with everybody on the planet." But Dennis Rodman was worthy of that attention, not even so much because of what he did on the court, but because he made himself into this larger-than-life character.
Yeah. You know, Joe puts on a lot of thousands of sporting events. How many? 10,000 or something through your career. What are people looking for? What attracts people to a sporting event? Do you need a marquee guy there, or is the sport itself enough to carry you?
Well, first of all, it's great to be here. Pat and I go back to the CBS days, so I'd like to be asking him all the questions most of the time, like where were you, what were you doing, and why were you late? But
Pat, that's just not right.
in answer to that question, this morning, life goes by so fast. I said to my wife, I'm going to go down and be on this panel, and it seems like you have to get older to be on panels, and I'm happy to know that I'm the oldest guy up here tonight. So, and I said, I think there are two goals. One, I want Pat to give me a good grade, and secondly, this generation that's sitting up here, and through the grant of Nike and through the Annenberg School, we're here tonight for the students because we've gone from analog to digital and digital to HD, and we've gone from when athletes had off-season jobs to make ends meet. And now we're going to hand the baton off to you students in sports media. And so this morning, trying to figure out how I was going to answer Pat's question, I picked up a sports page. And this is USA Today. And Amit talked with Payola, from grace to disgrace. Hole inside, Michigan State copes with death of player. Newton and Heitzler. Ex-NFL player gets 30 years in sexual assault case. Roger Federer is accused of gambling. And Pat says to me, when you manage events, how are you trying to attract attention to the event? And I spent most of my life at CBS and in auto racing, and the way we attracted people to events was, you're in mind, you wanted to see accidents. You came to see accidents. And if we gave you some good accidents, we got good ratings. And then it came to not being a good event, but how can you cheat in that event? You know, 1/16 of an inch on an airfoil puts a downforce on your rear spoiler that's going to allow you to brake later and come out of the turn faster. And my noble experience, like Pat's, is I had to get used to, as a CEO of a company, keeping a lot of stakeholders happy, and 172,000 people showed up at Texas Motor Speedway, and our drivers were getting sick, and our safety team thought it was the flu. And for all the students here tonight, there is no training to be a CEO of a sport. You have to live it, you have to breathe it, you have to be passionate about it. Like Scott is about representing his clients. Like the professor is about teaching his class. Like she is about winning a gold medal. And Pat was going light when he talks about David Neal. Dick Ebersol owes every success and statue he has in his office to this young man. I'd say it to Dick if he was here tonight.
Glad I came. Wow.
But you want to get on Google real quick, have 6 or 7 drivers that are going 190 miles an hour tell you they don't feel good. And then you do some testing on the track, and they're actually graying out on the track. So my ignoble experience as a CEO was with 172,000 people sitting in their seats, I canceled a race. I went from being a bright executive to one of the stupidest executives to ever come along. And the management of that event, as Pat has asked the question, is we managed racing by speed and letting our drivers get a little crazy. Unfortunately, accidents happen. And when accidents happen in racing, people get killed. And so, as a CEO of a company, a week before, I had found a memo of someone who I'd asked for the resignation. And the memo was from the safety committee that had conducted a test on that track the year before. And it said under no circumstances should turbo-aspirated 950 horsepower engine cars race on this track. So as a CEO of a public company, and having what the Nixon administration gave us, the smoking gun theory, I had no other alternative but to cancel that race. So, Pat, I think the secret to all of this is this next generation that's coming up has got an incredible ethical and moral core value system that they're going to have to be rigid with, and they're going to have to be absolutely passionate about it.
Let's thank you, Joe, and let's go back to this issue of character, Scott, because you know, you deal with franchises every day, and Scott again is known as the guy who gets pretty much what he wants from his athletes. He has a lot of talent behind him in terms of who he represents. But I think now what's happened in your world is that maybe the first or second question or third is character now, or does that count anymore?
I think the franchise decision, which you're bringing in this athlete, that ability-wise, the answer is very clear. He is unique. You're at that point with a franchise because he is something that other teams do not have. Might be one of 3, maybe one of 4 in all the world in his particular sport. The fear of that meeting is that for most collective bargaining agreements, in baseball particularly, is that you have control over an athlete and you can go year by year with the athlete for the first 6 years. And all the risk of that is bestowed upon the athlete. And the numbers are horrid. You're talking about a 0.0025% chance of being an athlete in that position. There aren't many that ever get there. The risk allocation. The first dynamic that they go to is the character, and the common questions are, how do we know that once the athlete is successful, that once this contract's bestowed upon him, that he will continue to perform at the same level? How do we know that he will take on additional responsibilities of leadership? How do we know that he will be someone that will work in the community and be a franchise player, be a face of our team? And in each dynamic, these are fair questions. And my first response to them is, if this were your child, what would you say to someone who was bestowing something upon your child that is this grand and requires this type of responsibility. And the owners often looked at me and go, I don't know. I really don't know what I would do. And I said, fair response. And the answer is that the great thing about the game is that if the game is important to the athlete, I think Tara spoke to this, is that when you play the game and you are fighting for a job every day and you're fighting to get there, most things about the game, your peers, the respect of your peers, the respect of the entire system that you've been in your whole life to get there, governs you. You will lose complete respect. Money does not matter. Your performance, your commitment, if you go outside the rules of the system, the hurt of it is not so much what's published. The hurt of it is that you lose everything that founded you and that you are noted for as a professional. And that was what normally guides the athlete to a point of character.
Who's your biggest contract? A-Rod?
Alex Rodriguez.
Yeah. So Scott gets Alex Rodriguez $230 million or whatever it was, biggest contract in the history of sports. And I know Alex, and Alex has been through a whole lot of tabloid talk. I mean, a whole lot. And I know that Alex himself, or at least he tells me, he doesn't read it. But you do. And I don't think I've ever seen any situation where A-Rod's been affected by that on the field. But your conversations, without breaking any confidentiality here, what is he? You're very close to him, but there's been so much crap written about this guy, and I don't know how he does it. I mean, I don't know how he actually can walk. Because see, a baseball player has 162 red carpets. Tom Hanks has 3. Will Smith has 4. Alex Rodriguez, even if he doesn't go to the World Series, has 162 at least, where he's got to face the media. So how does a guy like, not to make A-Rod the example, but let's anyway.
Well, not to be a lawyer, but I don't want to speak specifically. If I were to take an athlete that is held to be the extraordinary athlete of his profession, his sport, when they step into this, the main focus you have to give the athlete is that what you've acquired has little to do with how you perform tomorrow. The message of the game always is that tell me the person that is inoculated from the end. Second message. Because you see, when you give dynamics to athletes, and I've always tried to say, how can I always answer the question that I know is coming? I am 28, I'm on top, I'm the best, I know I'm the best, they know I'm the best, I am invincible. I have got the euphoric drug of the ultimate thing that sport gives you. I, for a moment in time, have that ability in the greatest, at the highest level of my sport, to step on a field and know I'm the best.
Yeah, well, you've been there, Tara. I mean, the difference between a silver and a gold, for example, is
Everything.
exponentially, ridiculously, from money to sponsors to the way you feel about yourself. And by the way, it shouldn't be, right, David? I mean, if you win an Olympic medal, whether it be bronze, silver, or gold, it's still an Olympic medal in my book, and that's what we tried to preach in our life.
I'd argue if you're an Olympian, that's an amazing distinction. Whether or not you even get on the podium.
Yeah, no, you're right,
you're
exactly
an
right.
Olympian.
But you out there, and I guess me too, you said gold medalist, but the difference between a silver and a gold, relating to what Scott was just talking about being the number one person in the world right then, what's that like? I mean,
Well,
it's got to be scary, I think.
There's a lot of pressure, and to just take it back to what you said, it's true. And all I wanted was to make it to the Olympics. I wanted to walk in the opening ceremonies. I wanted to be in the village. But of course, that's not all I wanted. And you probably could ask any 7-year-old ice skater, and they don't say I want to be the Olympic silver medalist. They say I want to win gold at the Olympics. So that's ingrained into you from a very young age, and it is. To me, it was all or nothing. And like you were saying, you feel invincible when you just win worlds and you're on the top, and everyone around you, agents, coaches, they all want you to keep performing this way. They will do anything, say anything do anything you think that they will get you out of any type of trouble to keep you performing a certain way. But in my sport, you can go out your next event and lose everything. So
It's gone.
It's gone, and it's just a lot. It's a lot of pressure.
But the other thing is that when you're in this position, and Alberto Tomba, was he in Nagano, David? Was Tomba still skiing?
Yes.
Yeah. Alberto Tomba from Italy is one of the greatest playboy skiers in the history of sex, basically. But the difference is that in 3 Olympics before, if Alberto walked up to Tara in a bar and said, "Congratulations on your gold medal," it'd be fine. But nowadays, if you walked up to her in a bar and said, "Can I buy a glass of wine? Congratulations," and they're getting 2 pictures are taken of that, suddenly you're sleeping with Alberto Tomba. I don't mean to be that. But you know what I mean? I mean, that's the way they go. We know you're not. But you know what I mean? That's what's happened today in the media. They can take, I mean, they've taken pictures of me, anybody, just when you meet somebody, you go, "Hi," and you go, "Kiss," and they say someone's making out with somebody in public. I mean, do you find that to be...
Well, I'm so conscious of it
Yeah.
at all times, and I think, it may depend on your personality or your family, but even at that young age, 12 and 13, I knew what was expected of me, and I knew what would be wrong, and it was hard, and I've never smoked, to get a glass of wine in me took 25 years, so
I know, I tried. All right, settle down.
So I just think, everything I do, I'm aware that it affects me in the long run. And it's hard because you can't just live normally. If I take a picture, I make sure and I'm aware of what I'm doing.
Hey, Pat,
yes, sir.
when you and I were in Sydney, we saw this phenomenon there that they call the tall poppy syndrome, where they, and particularly in the Australian press, as well as just in public perception, there seems to be this unending cycle of building people up to then want to whack them out. And I think that's taken hold here too, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's what I was going to ask Larry about, is that when you're teaching journalism or a part of a journalism school, where is the character of the professors to say it's, you know what I mean? The character of teaching character and ethics in the class, saying, do you realize what your job means to people's lives? In other words, you're going out in the world to write about somebody or to do a story or a report on something. There should be a course in saying, you damn well better get it right, because you're not only going to ruin this person's life, but they have brothers and sisters and kids, and there's a collateral damage involved with this stuff that we've all been through it in some way. That's out of control, and I wonder if that doesn't start at the educational institution.
Well, it does. And most credible journalism schools, I'd almost say all, they don't necessarily do a good job of it. They teach a course like I do. It's called media ethics. And when I introduce myself and I say I teach media ethics, you know what that reaction is. The reaction is, I didn't know there were any. Okay? And that's how I get one joke. And then I get the next joke. Media ethics, isn't that oxymoronic? Right? Okay? So the place of media ethics is, in many regards, sort of marginalized in the course of professional journalism education. At the same time, our news system is changing. Not just in sports, but all over the place. We got a lot of folks that are doing news. I wouldn't call it journalism necessarily. They're not journalists. They're not taking my course. They're not thinking about these things. They're thinking about growing an entrepreneurial business enterprise on the net to get that monetized. That's a pretty compelling force.
And Joe, I want to talk to you about that, but I want to switch to David first. I'm also going to limit people's answers to about 1:30, okay? So we can get a lot of topics in, if you don't mind. But David, when you're in charge of the Olympics, as you have been, how many now?
9.
9. So that's tied with Jim McKay, I guess, almost.
Something like, yeah.
But he was never in
Yeah.
charge. You thought he was in charge, but he was really in charge. But what is character anymore? I mean, you know, when we sit in those meetings at the Olympics, we under David anyway, there are a tremendous amount of research and meetings and just the little things, the nuances in the business, like you know, an African American athlete who speaks well. You know, don't call him articulate, and not a white athlete who doesn't speak well. Don't even mention, you know, and so you can't put those labels on people. But how were you successfully able to come out of 9 Olympics in doing a clean broadcast and leaving all the stuff behind that people, well, honestly, people actually want to know about? I mean, they might turn in and say, I want to know about smoking a bong somewhere.
You know, this really is a tribute to Dick. He, early on, and he learned under Roone Arledge, the idea of the way we covered the Olympics at NBC was we were not taking it upon ourselves to be judgmental about the character of the athletes. We really took a very laser-focused approach that said we're going to document what happens within the Olympic Games. And if someone else wants to make judgments about the character of the people involved, then that's fine. So it really, the enormity of the Olympics, and we did 1,000 hours from Beijing. The enormity of the undertaking with a relatively small staff, as you know, Pat, when we were working together, we didn't have tons of people like they used to in the old days. The enormity of it means that you have to sort of narrow your focus anyway. And in some ways that makes for a cleaner model. If you're just covering what happens, fully documenting what happens. That doesn't mean that if there's controversy, you don't get involved. When there was a question of whether Phelps was touched out at the wall by Cavich, you know, we documented that. But in terms of the character issue, it was ground that we frankly didn't have to tread.
Yeah. David and I, every time we see each other, we kind of do this because we never see each other looking normal. It's always been at Olympic where we've been up 17 days in a row and our eyes just sunk into our heads.
Actually, a very good-looking man, Pat.
Well, I get hair and makeup done.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's go back, Joe, and briefly try to take us from where you and I and David, anybody old enough to have been around. Like I'm fortunate enough to have been really good friends with Mickey Mantle and really good friends with P. Diddy. I mean, that's how long I've been around, and Eminem, and so I go both. But I go back to the old days. Mickey Mantle was a baseball player, I guess he was. I go back to the old days when we were running around in New York, and none of that stuff got reported from the athletes back then in the 60s and 70s. You know, Mantle and DiMaggio, and even go back to Babe Ruth, and even Sinatra, a lot of the things Sinatra did. None of that got out. You've seen the transition. How sick does it make you, or do you think it's just a normal way because of what Larry brought up, the 24-hour news cycle, which just cannot be fed enough bad stuff? Which, by the way, means you cannot. I mean, if you're watching something that's awful on television or listening to it on the radio, it's because somebody wanted it. They don't put it on because you don't want it. So trust me on that.
Well, you and I happened to work for a network that was called the Tiffany Network. And it had, quote unquote, the most trusted voice in broadcasting in Walter Cronkite. And you and I had mentors. One was a graduate of SC by the name of Bob Wood. And we had Bill Paley, who was the founder. And so I submit to you, Pat, that the core competency of values are driven from the top. And how we've evolved into the, quote, everyone worships success and roots for failure, I don't know how it got started. But we want to build everybody up, and then we want to say, well, you got the Rolex and you don't deserve it, and you have the trophy wife and you don't deserve it, and you got the Ferrari in the garage, and then they whittle away at it. And all I can say to the students here tonight is, pick your business heroes and pick your mentors and make good choices and have control of your value system. She was worried about being seen in a situation that she didn't want to be in. And we're all concerned about that. But in answer to your question, Pat, you got to make choices. And if you're going to make a choice for value, it has to be right and it has to be here. It can't be in a book.
I'll give you an example. And I'm sorry, I'm going to pick on Scott for a minute, because if you listen to talk radio and you hear a new contract comes up and someone's getting $230 million, and they say, well, his agent is Scott, suddenly, and I'm sure you've heard it sometimes, they go, oh, Scott, I mean, he's got to be, this guy ruined sports, blah, blah, blah. I mean, you hear this, hopefully, I've never said it, but I mean, I haven't, because I know, but you listen to most people on the radio, Scott Boras, oh, that's his agent? There goes that. And people have such a wrong perception because of a large portion of the media, celebrates more of how cute and funny they can be at that particular moment than they do the actual truth, and honestly don't have enough time to explain that Scott has probably done more for baseball than almost anybody except the commissioner. But when his name comes up, all they think about is, oh, A-Rod, he's 0 for 22, and he's getting 230. So how do you respond to that? I mean, when you hear that, or are you smart enough to never turn anything on?
Well, I think I had a law professor tell me that if you're really an effective lawyer for your client, 95% of what's said about him is positive, and 95% of what's said about you is negative. And the truth of that is that, the people think that our job, or the job that I do, is about money. And going back to Joe's point, it's about values. And the way you take athletes, or anybody, is that they're going to be from a wide variety of spheres of morality, religion, backgrounds, homes. And you have to give someone something that they can trust, that they know is true. Now, when they're really talented, they can overcome the truth with their talent. That means they can overcome rules with their talent. Mm-hmm. That means that they can do things that other people can't do, and at a young age, they take advantage of that. But you try to give messages to athletes to say, it's not about being great. Greatness is defined by repeating greatness. Mm-hmm. And you give an example of people in the framework of the game that they measure as great. And they're finding out that repeating greatness is the answer. Yeah. And you give them that to them at a young age and say, oh, you just signed for $2 million. Or you just got your first contract and now you're a multimillionaire. But really what your goal was at inception was you wanted to be identified with the greats. And the morality of what they do becomes an internal structure where you get them to look to the highest moment and the person of the greatest achievement, rather than be clouded by their monumental steps of achievement, because great individuals, or very talented individuals, are often, most often, never as great as they should be, because their message at the beginning is not the right platform, and much, like teaching the journalist, much like giving a value structure, the real moment of a player's career when you begin is your skill is most likely a curse, because you will be unfulfilled unless you're looking at the right definition of greatness.
And I want to talk to Tara about that too, because it's about a month ago I wrote this open letter to Lindsay Lohan, which got some attention because I'm a recovering alcoholic and I think that she should get help. And it was kind of an endearing letter to Lindsay about, there's places to go to get help and you got to get a hold of yourself and that sort of thing. And then someone interviewed me about it, and in the course of the interview, I said, like I would say to David Neal, I said, I love her, and I love David for different reasons. But I mean, in the course of the thing, I said, I just want Lindsay to know, I hope she's okay, that I love her. Well, the headline was Pat O'Brien in love with Tara. Well, what about Tara? Pat O'Brien says he loves Lindsay Lohan. This was the headline on the internet for about 6 days, and all I said was the same thing I'd say to you when I go, I love you, goodbye. But I mean, how do you, and I know you tutor or maybe mentor a lot of the young skaters coming up, how do you explain to them, watch out what pictures you put on your Facebook, watch out the gag reel from we all know what goes on.
Well, you learn, and you learn from a young age, and sometimes you don't even need to be told. You see it happen to your elders, and you know right from wrong. But I think the biggest thing is, especially with the media, for an athlete, you should only care. I mean, I'm speaking from my personal experience. It didn't matter if there was a show that was paying me this amount of money. I was in charge of what I was doing. I love my sport so much. If that interfered with my training, and even if I could have taken the day off, I wouldn't. Because in the end, I don't care about the money. I care about being the best at what I can be. And I gave up my entire childhood for that. And, it is frustrating when the media gets involved. To be honest, I don't think I think NBC, and, for me watching the Olympic Games, they do a great job at just reporting the talent. I get so excited when the fluff pieces come on because you just realize how exciting this is. Someone has given up their life for this moment. I think it's more for the journalists, the newspapers, the internet that can really make a difference in how people view you as an athlete.
Larry, I want to get to you on this, but I don't want to show of hands, but just in your own mind, how many people out here think that Nancy Kerrigan, don't raise your hand, please. Nancy Kerrigan is a whiny bitch, probably most of you. And the reason is because the media latched on to her, and Nancy can be whiny, but the media latched on to that when she lost the gold to Oksana Bayul and was caught, I think it was the CBS Olympics, wasn't it? Yeah, it was caught on camera whining about something. That's what they went with. Now, there's no nicer person in the world than Nancy Kerrigan, by the way. She was, even that night, I interviewed her that night, and she was, I made a mistake. But it's those mistakes that the media picks up on. And as Tara was saying, you have to be careful on what you do these days. But I put a lot of the blame on schools like this, that we're not, and that's why I love this idea so much of this kind of forum, is that we're not teaching people, or teaching is the wrong word, right, Larry? I mean, we're not letting people know how this affects them, or maybe we're wrong. Maybe we should say, look, if you want to really make money, say, make the headline, Pat O'Brien loves Lindsay Lohan.
Yeah, I think we're mixing up a few things. The journalist's role ultimately is to tell the truth. And if some things are not as represented, and there's a good deal of public relations that goes into the sport industry, and there's the building of celebrity, and there's myth-making, and all those things. That's a huge industry. And if a journalist finds that some of that truth stretching is not quite honest, that's the job of a journalist. No problem there. But when we give rise to things that are none of our business, if you will, untruthful, unverified, rumor, for the sake of generating market, that's the problem. So I would say that journalists doing their job, telling the truth on things that have been represented as truthful, if you will, for the athlete, may not be comfortable, but it comes with the territory.
Yeah. We're going to take questions here in about 5 minutes. We'll go around for a couple more. How are we doing on time here? Who's in charge of the clock here? Okay. Are you disinterested yet? You want to keep going? You okay? David, are there ethics anymore?
Yeah, there are. I referenced earlier that even as a broadcaster, you have to have at least 1 foot on the side of the journalism fence, and there are ethics. Of the 9 Olympics I did, 5 of them were on tape because of the part of the world they were in, and there were occasional discussions because it might have fit better into a show format. There were discussions of, well, should we play swimming races out of order, or should we show different skaters in a different order? And I'll be honest, I was mortified when this discussion was even broached, but I'm also happy to say that it was not allowed to go forward. So I think as a broadcaster, not my degree from SC is in journalism, but as a broadcaster, which is where I've made my career, I think that you have to not violate the trust that the viewers are putting in you. That part of it is integrity. Part of it is just simply doing the right thing. You can't manipulate the truth, even though you can. We have the tools now. We've got all the edit systems. We've got all the post-production tools you need. Annenberg's got most of them these days. You can take things and move them around, but just because you should, or just because you can, doesn't mean you should.
Yeah.
So yeah, there is integrity, and it should stay in play.
Let's go back to the Cam Newton thing, because this campus is well aware of what happened to Reggie Bush here, and that's one of the reasons why the Heisman no longer sits on this campus. In my opinion, it should still be here, by the way, because I believe what he did was on the field, or that he earned that on the field, not off the field. And I've rallied for him. But Scott, I got to ask you. Now we have another athlete who's involved, and by the way, we don't know everything that Reggie Bush was involved in. I mean, most of it is speculation. I think I know, but I mean, most of it that I read, that's the headline, is wrong. Now we have another athlete, this guy named Cam Newton, who's at Auburn. As I said earlier, is accused of maybe taking some money from an agent or something, or saying, I won't come play for you until you give us $180,000. But aren't the allegations alone enough to ruin this kid's career? I'll tell you one thing, it's going to ruin his Heisman chances. Because everybody's going to say, oh, it's another Reggie Bush. I'll be honest with you.
Well, certainly the player is associated with something that is not related to his performance, and most people now know him for something that has nothing to do with his performance. As great as an athlete as he is. One of the problems with college sports, clearly, is this. They bring an asset to an environment, and they call it something that every school covets. They call it a scholarship. The difference, though, is that with these athletes comes celebrity, skill, notoriety, all in advance. What does the NCAA do? You're not allowed to have an attorney. This young man needs an attorney. Why? Because compliance officers at schools, while as well-being as they are, they will go and interview this young man. Everything that young man says to them is now discoverable, public notice, because there's no attorney-client privilege that exists. The university thinks they're doing something well, and they are in protecting their interests, but the athlete thinks that he has a confidential relationship with his coach, with his compliance officers, with the president of the school. None of the privilege does not exist. So by talking to the people, the only people that the athlete knows, and that he is in charge, his future, his asset, to that school, he's in charge of that, to them, they have in effect created a breach of his basic rights that every American has, and that is the right of an attorney and the right of representation. And if we allow that to continue, and the NCAA is making, if not billions of dollars off these young men's skill, and there's literally no cost other than the scholarship. The reality of it is we have to come to grips with legislation. We have to allow the rights to these athletes so they be protected, and so that we have a system that our country is based on, apply to the very youth of people that we bring to these campuses.
Yeah, and I mean, and then we're going to take some questions here, but, if you're Reggie Bush or Cam Newton or anybody, you're walking around and people are buying your jerseys for $64 in the campus shop and you're not getting a cent, or someone's having a fundraiser, you show up and they're making money. The system's all out of whack, and then you take something here or there, and then suddenly the entire school has to be embarrassed. But
I guess I would.
Don't get me started on that.
I think I'm going to become very unpopular right now. I participated in a panel at TBS where there were 5 athletic directors, 3 network executives, and 4 All-American athletes. And if we're going to have a societal change and scholarship versus athleticism, then there has to be a definitive road to go down. If you're a football player, you don't have any time during the course of the year to go and work. My son is a student athlete here at SC. I said, how are you doing? He said, I don't have enough time to go to the bathroom. But the issue is that we've made it a monetary thing. And as Pat just said, they're not getting the money for the jersey. But where I'm going to be unpopular right now is, why should they get the money for the jersey? They accepted a scholarship. They accepted the terms and the conditions of that scholarship. And if you don't like it, leave. But this is an institution that has culture, it has core values, and if you want to live by them, you can stay here. Reggie Bush is going to make his money when he gets out. And the real harbinger, and one of the things we have to deal with, the PGA does the best job of it. They put you through, when you get the cue card, they put you through a school. And they say, these are the rules and these are the regulations. And until the recent Tiger Woods thing, I think you'd agree with this, Pat, the golf is a very clean environment. Why? They have a benevolent dictator who says that this is the way it's going to be, and if you want to be in this fraternity, you will live by these rules.
If I may, Joe, just add to your popularity. Remember, the issue is not the money. The issue is the right, the basic right that every American has. If you violate a law in this country and you go and you are incarcerated, you have the right to what? Counsel. And the fact of the matter is that our greatest athletes who are making millions of dollars for these institutions do not have that basic right.
I would agree with
and
you.
they are. That's I knew was going to make
whole
it
different
popular.
conversation, which I started, by the way.
Yeah.
But you're right, and that's something that this university should take up. And is we could get into the whole thing about the NCAA and what they do, but let's open it up to questions. Anybody got a question? Now, don't try to be the first one. Yes, sir. Go ahead. Yeah.
So, what's your call to action here for us as aspiring journalists and media producers? What are we supposed to do going forward to change this?
Well, the one thing, from my point of view, is don't be in a hurry. We lost in the television business. We lost an entire generation of television journalists and hosts because in the 80s, if you were good-looking and had a nice voice, and in the case of Fox, blonde, you get a job. You get a job. And what happened was that in the 80s, a lot of these people went from journalism school right into some anchor job and didn't have any skills. They didn't do the writing or the researching or the producing, which, maybe seems boring when you see Nancy O'Dell jumping out of a limo somewhere and you think that's what I want to be. But no, I mean, students today, and I've one just graduated from NYU, and he knows this, so he's okay, but students are too much in a hurry to get someplace where they may not belong right away. Does that make sense? And so to answer your question is, even now in these fast-moving times, there's groundwork to be made, but also there's so many opportunities to do your groundwork. There's the internet, there's blogs, all this stuff, and you don't have to be me right away, or Tara, or David. Or Scott, you don't have to be your idols or mentors. Not that we are, but you know what I'm saying. You don't have to look at somebody and say. But if you look across the landscape of TV, the best people on TV are over 50 because they lost all this whole 80s group who were in a hurry and they had to be on TV and they had to sit in the makeup chair. Blah blah blah. They're gone. And if you look at tapes, which David has, there's nobody out there. I'll tell you right now, there's no men out there. I'll work forever. There's no good, really great guys who have all the skills, right? Am I right? You can look at 900 tapes and say, oh, maybe there's 2 of them. Right, David?
That's true. Yeah. The other thing I would add is that you have to provide your own moral compass. You have to decide what matters to you. You have to decide, first of all, what part of the business you're going to go to. If you're going to go work on TMZ, then your compass is going to be skewed. If you're going to go work for a traditional journalistic outlet, your integrity's got to be self-contained. You'll adapt to whatever environment you're working in, just as you'll adapt to the style guide of any publication or any media outlet that you might be working for. But ultimately, you've got to be your own toughest critic. You've got to be your own arbiter. And by going to a school like Annenberg, you're going to be better equipped to do those things for yourself than most of your peers who are coming out of other universities. But it's got to start here. You've got to know right from wrong, and then you've got to enforce that yourself.
And I'll get to you some, but I'll give you an example. Is that when I worked for David, and David would be in charge of me and Bob Costas and Jim Lampley and all these big TV stars. But, you know, he was my mentor. You know, I would, if I had anything in my mind, I think I didn't disappoint you a lot, but if I had, and the same with Bob Costas, anything that's going on in my head, I ran it by him. I said, you know, what if we went here? And he'd say yes or no. I mean, so you got to have the moral compass inside you, which I was taught. Thankfully, I had a mentor. Yeah, it's a team and it's a partnership, and there's got to be somebody with a better mind than yours who's in charge. Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, I don't think it's so much about age, because I'm just saying, you can be young and want to achieve things at a young age, and it doesn't mean that you have to wait till you're older. I think what's so important is knowing what you're talking about. If there's anything you can do, is just know your sport inside out. Know that you have the facts, and when you say something or write something, that it's legit. You know, like for me, as in my sport, I know my sport so well. And a lot of people, I think you can get swayed. I get tons of research, and I look, and you know, before I go out there, I think, okay, where did they get this research? Was it from the internet? Was it from a blog? Was it from someone that didn't like this skater? And I have to make sure when I'm watching her that I'm talking from the heart and from my own knowledge about the sport, and maybe it's completely different than what was given to me on paper.
Yes.
Can I make just a small suggestion here? Well, what can you do? You know, we've had a financial crisis here in the country in the last few years. And our reaction was, oh my goodness, how did this catch us so shorthanded? Why didn't the journalists know about this? How come they couldn't see it? And one of the reasons is that the financial journalists didn't have adequate training in finance and economics and all those things that actually they were covering. And a lot of the financial press was rah-rah, right? They weren't saying, watch out here. No. So the suggestion is, maybe, on occasion, you need to get out of the journalism school. Maybe you need to know a little bit more about the sport culture, sociology of sport, the sport business, and the like, as well as just journalism.
Yeah, I mean, should I say this or not? I should keep my big mouth shut. I worked with a woman who had just been named host of Entertainment Tonight, Nancy O'Dell, and this will be in my book. So, you know, but she admits to me that she's never in her life read a book, ever.
She's going to read yours, Pat.
She'll be reading mine.
It's a quaint notion.
But I know a lot of people. I don't mean to pick on poor Nancy, but you know, I've worked with people who never heard of Faulkner, never, you know, can't quote a Hemingway, doesn't know Winston Churchill. You know, he's right. The professor is right. Yeah, right there.
Hi, my name is Brooke Van Dam, and I'm actually a professor of journalism.
Great.
Although I look like I'm 21, I'm not.
Yes,
I actually teach it. I have a doctorate. I'm legit. I find this argument a bit disingenuous in terms of blaming the media for the stories that are out there. Without the media, we wouldn't have the huge sports industry in our country that we do today. It wouldn't exist without it. And in that, there are some stories that are going to come out that I feel like there should be truth out there. These people should be telling these stories. And one of the things I find in teaching students that they want more than anything that they don't find in the media today is reality and truth and the ability to trust those that have been put in a position of, you know, they have a voice that most of us won't ever have. And so in that, I don't know, I mean, the rumor mill and the internet thing, yes, but on the whole, I don't know if sports journalism is as bad ethically as we're making it sound.
Well, it's a great point, and it's a good question. I'm going to let David handle this, but I think that, and I'll take it, but what happens is, and I don't think I do this, when I was doing those goofy entertainment shows, now we were forced to do certain things that were more tabloid than anything. For example, you know, we'd come on the air and say, George Clooney's left Hollywood, and then 20 minutes later we'd say he's gone to Italy on vacation. But that's how you get ratings. But, you know, is she right? I mean...
No, To your point, I don't think it's anybody up here suggesting that the reporting shouldn't happen. I think that the point is it's got to be accurate. That dealing in innuendo, dealing in rumor, dealing in unfounded fact, that's irresponsible. There's nothing wrong with reporting what's going on. So I know, for one, I don't think any of my friends up here are suggesting that there shouldn't be reporting going on, but it needs to be fact-based reporting. And I would argue that that's
If I can,
Go ahead.
when you speak of something, what journalists are under, because in the academic sense, what I'm hearing is you're taught correctly. You understand how to refine a story, get to the truth of the matter, collect your facts. I know in the baseball industry, the people that cover the teams, the journalists that are there every day, they're the best. Because these men have been doing it for years. They cover the teams. Their stories are accurate. They know they're myopic. They're driven into the game. The daily reporters of the team are the best. But when you do talk radio, and you get 50 calls a week to do it, and you have people that are there on a rating scale with a short period of time, not knowing who they're talking to, covering 8 different sports at one time, and they're just there to get a reaction, that is a product of journalism as well. Now, we have to define, when we talk about what type of journalism we're dealing with, but remember, the market that Larry speaks of is clearly at issue with the time element. The cake is never cooked. We're getting pudding. And that affects the good journalists who are out there doing their jobs, which is the mainstream journalists, primarily writing the story of the day about the game. But the problem is the journalists that are out there to uncover the stories that are probably gaining a lot of interest are those that are on a time crunch and a deadline, and therefore they use the term unnamed source, allegation, and then the reality of the truth is limited.
And there's a way, and that's a very good point, plus it's a great question too, but there's a way to do it, there's a way not to do it. I mean, one of the reasons that I don't know anybody who wouldn't sit down with me, I don't know of any of your clients who wouldn't, and I've reported what I thought was true about all these people. Tiger's a good friend of mine, I know these guys, and I've been forced to talk about their foibles. I've explained them a little differently, but what you have to get your students engaged in is trust. I think I have a tremendous amount of trust among athletes and celebrities because I've never screwed them. I mean, I've never literally just said this is the way it is. I've had to report bad things, but I've learned through the years how to do it in a way that's not so tabloid. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, it's you.
My question goes to Scott and Joe, since you guys kind of touched on the NCAA a little bit. And my question to you guys is, would you have a dictatorship with the NCAA that penalizes the player and follows them through their career, or penalizes the institution for not handling it appropriately?
Well, I'm not sure how we create. The question is, the system is now widely different because of the demands. We have coaches that are making $6-7 million a year. We have universities that are pulling down. They're spending $50 million a year on on their football programs. So the dynamic is different. We have to re-legislate this. We have to make sure we can't charge 18-year-old boys coming to college on a scholarship. We can't charge them with the legislation and governance of this entrance into academia and sport. What we have to do is collectively, in panels such as these, redefine how we're going to measure the distribution of the economics of the sport, how we're going to define the right structure of the sport, how we're going to find what the contract says. Once we do that, and I think it obviously begins with legislation, and it obviously begins with a political element that we're really taking something that is really, really good and part of our fabric, and just frankly adjusting it to modern times.
One more question, then we're going to wrap it up, because you've had your hand up.
Hi, my name is Bill Ware, and
Yeah.
this question is probably a little more intimate to Scott Boras, but I want to ask about the ethical line between blogging and reporting, and as a backdrop to that discussion and discussion of that answer, the Raul Ibanez situation that happened a couple years ago with respect to the blogger that came out that inferred that because of Ibanez's substantially aberrant production, he might be using steroids. And then the line reporter in Philadelphia picking up that story and challenging Ibanez directly, you know, and given the blogger's inference, the gravitas of legitimacy, and then all the fallout from that.
Yeah, again, you take any of the modern power hitters today where you have a player who hits all of a sudden 50 home runs and he's never done it before. Jose Bautista
Went from 13 to 53.
Yeah. And the answer, the interesting thing about journalism now is that this is where the integrity, you know, is the integrity of the journalist that really has the ability to publish the story beyond the blog. Because the filter now is that if you're a journalist and you use blogs as an informational source, they're not going to have the widespread distribution that the mainstream journalist has. And so that ethic lies primarily with the journalist who, you know, we get a lot of allegations made about a lot of people in a lot of blogs. 95% of them are unfounded. The journalist usually has that responsibility. The mainstream journalist who has the ability to broadcast this either through paper or through mainstream sites or electronic media, they have the ability to reach millions. That is who we found to be the person that answers that question.
Somebody from the Associated Press did an interview with me about 2 weeks ago, and every question they asked me was off my Wikipedia, and every one of them was wrong. And I finally said to her, I said, where are you getting this stuff? She said, your Wikipedia. Now are you kidding me? I mean, I said, go back and do some real research, you know? I mean, come on. One more question, and then we're going to make it a good one. There you go, right over in the corner, student.
Hi, I'm a broadcast journalism or digital journalism major in Annenberg, and I'm a sophomore, and I'm a new sports media minor. And I was wondering, I'm not a college athlete. I'm not going to be a professional one. Where do you see the future of those broadcasters and reporters in the sports media? Because I feel as though college athletes and former professional athletes are looked as those familiar faces and those valid reporters versus someone that goes through a program like this where I don't have a name.
Right.
So do you see this industry going more towards celebrities and people and the former athletes talking about their former experience?
Well, here's one that just took your job.
Sorry.
Why don't you talk about that?
Well, I think everyone first will go to the athlete that's experienced it, that the viewers, you know, might get a different type of insight. But I think, to be honest, in the end, if you're good at it, it doesn't matter. And it's just like in a sport, talent is seen.
Yeah, David, how about you?
Yeah. I wouldn't discount your ability to overcome not being an athlete. Honestly, the finest broadcaster I've ever worked with in my entire career is Bob Costas.
Well, that's enough for me.
Yeah. You were next. Tara Lipinski looks like Wilt Chamberlain next to Bob Costas. So Bob is not anyone who ever had any athletic prowess, but he is an accomplished broadcaster. He's no Pat O'Brien, but he is a fine broadcaster.
I thought he was a jockey.
Yeah. And I would argue that you don't have to be an ex-athlete to be a fine broadcaster. In fact, you could say that you have a head start because you're worrying about being a broadcaster, a journalist now while you're in school instead of being an athlete and then trying to pick it up later. So I wouldn't worry for a single minute. If you do the hard work, if you've got the ability, if you've got your integrity, not being a former athlete, that's not a handicap at all.
And just in closing, I want to thank everybody up here, but that's exactly what I was taught for you students out there, what I was talking about a while ago. If you're good at what you do, by the way, the broadcasting journalism is a tough business. Broadcasting is the only business that really eats its young, and you can be great for a week, you can be great for 2 weeks, but it's going out there every day. It's like a farmer. You got to get up every morning at 4, and well, you don't have to get up at 4 now, but I mean, you got to get up and you got to do the work and till the soil, and make sure that your values. First of all, you should make sure to know what you're doing to people when you write something about them. And also, the way you live your own life, live it like I do now, is not have any secrets, so that when you say something about somebody, they can't come back and say, but I saw you do this. You got to live your life right and do the work and be passionate about it. And you're not in a better place. I mean, there's no better place than this. They care about students here. They love teaching here. And it's a great place to be. And I thank you all for staying. I can't believe everybody stayed. Wow. But it's getting to be late in traffic time, so thank you so much for coming, and thank the UFC.
I like coming up right at the end because everybody's clapping. But we want to thank our first panel on the inaugural program of the Sports and Social Change Speaker Series that Nike is sponsoring at the Annenberg School for Communication and our Annenberg Institute of Sports Media and Society. We do have some refreshments at the back. Before you guys get to get your refreshments, though, this is the commencement of the first graduating class of the Nike Speakers Series. So we need to get a class picture with them. But we want to thank you all. We want to thank you all and thank the panelists for coming. Thank you.
Okay.